The smell came first, always the smell. Fungal rot and burnt promethium, and the particular sweetness of their blood, which wasn't red but something darker, thicker, like old oil mixed with spore matter. I crouched in the ruins of processing shaft 9 Tertius, my respirator clicking with each breath, and watched the greenskin die slowly in the rubble. It had been 3 hours, most of them went quicker. This one kept trying to speak. I was a lexical analyst for the Departamento Xenologos, subdivision Orcoid Threat Assessment, assigned to Hive Tertius on a world whose name had been struck from official records after the third incursion. My job was simple: catalog their battle cant, identify war leaders through linguistic patterns, feed data to the artillery divisions. I had done this for 11 years. I had listened to thousands of them die. I had never heard one ask why before. The greenskin was old, you could tell by the scar tissue, the way its tusks had yellowed and cracked, the strange barnacle-like growths across its shoulders that their kind developed after decades of survival. Most died young, most wanted to. This one had lived long enough that its skin had darkened to the color of old leather, and its eyes, those small red eyes set deep in that brutal face, had lost some essential fire. It lay pinned beneath a fallen support beam, its legs crushed to paste, and it spoke in a voice that rattled with fluid and confusion. Why we always fighting? My recorder scratched the words onto wax cylinder. My hand trembled. I told myself it was the cold. Standard doctrine held that the greenskins were genetically compelled toward violence, that their entire biology was a weapon forged by ancient Xenos engineers, that they had no capacity for philosophy or doubt. I had written reports affirming this. I had signed my name to documents that recommended total extermination policies, that advocated for chemical weapons and orbital bombardment, that treated them as a fungal infection rather than a sapient threat. The greenskin coughed, and something dark spattered across the broken rockcrete. Every day, same. We fight da armies, we fight da boys, we fight everyone, and I don't remember why we started. I should have left. I should have triggered the demo charge I'd planted in the shaft and sealed this entire section. Instead, I moved closer, my boots crunching on debris, and I activated the secondary recorder, the one that didn't feed directly to departmental archives, the one I'd requisitioned for field redundancy but had never actually used. "How long have you been fighting?" I asked. My voice sounded strange through the respirator, mechanical and distant. The greenskin's eyes found me. There was something in them I had never seen in its kind before, something that looked almost like exhaustion, not physical exhaustion, the other kind. Dunno, long time, real long, fought on. How many worlds? Dozens? Hundreds? Can't remember the first one, can't remember when I was small, just waking up and there's a fight and I fight and we move on, and there's another fight and I fight and it just keeps. I knelt beside it, careful to stay beyond its reach even in its ruined state. The smell was overwhelming, that fungal rot mixing with the copper-sharp tang of their blood. "Do you want to fight?" The question hung in the air. The greenskin stared at me, and for a long moment the only sound was the drip of water somewhere deeper in the shaft and the distant rumble of artillery. I don't know," it said finally. "I don't know if I want to or if I just do it, like breath in, but sometimes I think, what if I stopped? What if I just didn't? What would happen? What would happen indeed?" I had read the xenological reports. I knew what happened to greenskins who lost their aggression. They sickened, they withered, their own kind turned on them. Their biology demanded violence. It was woven into every cell. To question it was to question the structure of reality itself. "You die," I said quietly. "Yeah." The greenskin coughed again, weaker this time. "Yeah, probably, but I'm dying anyway, ain't I? And I don't feel like fighting about it, I'm just tired." I sat there in the ruins with the enemy of mankind, and I committed my first act of treason. I didn't call in the coordinates. I didn't trigger the charge. I just listened. It talked for another hour, its voice fading in and out, the words becoming slurred and confused, but the meaning horribly clear. It talked about worlds it had ravaged, battles it couldn't distinguish from one another, a vast grinding monotony of violence that stretched back beyond memory. It talked about watching its war band shrink and swell and shrink again, about leaders who rose and fell and were forgotten. It talked about the moment, perhaps a decade ago, perhaps more, when it had killed an enemy, some other Xenos breed, something with too many limbs, and had felt nothing, no joy, no satisfaction, just the mechanical completion of a task. That's when I knew something was wrong, it whispered, when it stopped feeling right, when it was just something I did, over and over forever. The greenskin died at the 2-hour mark, but I stayed for another 30 minutes, listening to my own breathing in the respirator, staring at the corpse. Then I retrieved both recorders, triggered the charge, and made my way back to the surface through the maintenance tunnels. I filed my standard report that evening. Greenskin specimen, aged, combat deceased during sweep of processing shaft 9 tertius. Linguistic data minimal, battle cant consistent with previous samples from this incursion. Recommended continuation of current artillery patterns. I signed my name in the appropriate spaces. I submitted the official recorder cylinder to archives. The secondary recorder I kept. That was 7 months ago, and I cannot stop thinking about what the greenskin said. I go through the motions of my work with the same mechanical precision I always have, but now I see something different in the data I collect. I hear the battle roars and the war cries, and I wonder how many of them are genuine, and how many are just habit, biology, the momentum of genetic programming grinding forward without purpose or end. I began to request older files, archived recordings from previous incursions decades past. I told my supervisor I was conducting a longitudinal study on linguistic drift. She approved the request without question. Why wouldn't she? I was a model analyst, 12 years of service, 3 commendations, no disciplinary marks. I found others. Not many, perhaps 1 in every 500 recordings. Greenskins who had lived too long, survived too much, and in their final moments had said things that shouldn't be possible. Questions, doubts, confusion. One asked, "Is this all there is?" Another said, "I'm so tired of the red. Why is it always red?" A third, "We fight 'cause we're made to fight, but who made us? Who wanted this?" These recordings had been flagged in the archives as anomalous but not unusual. Death trauma causing linguistic confusion, irrelevant to tactical assessment. No one had ever compiled them. No one had ever looked at the pattern. I looked at the pattern. I began to calculate. If the greenskin species is biologically immortal except through violence, and if aggression is genetically hardwired, then theoretically the oldest specimens should be the most violent, the most refined killers. But the data suggested otherwise. The oldest specimens, those who had somehow survived for decades, showed consistent signs of behavioral degradation, decreased aggression, confusion, philosophical inquiry. It wasn't death trauma. It was something else. I wrote a preliminary report. I didn't submit it. I kept it locked in my personal file, and I continued to gather data. I requested field assignments, volunteered for corpse duty, exposed myself to risks that my position normally exempted me from. I needed more samples. I needed to be sure. 3 months ago I found another one. This one had survived a plasma blast that had fused its right arm to its torso. It lay in a crater for 6 hours before I could reach it, and when I did, it looked at me with something approaching relief. "You gonna finish it?" it asked. "If you want," I said. Yeah, I want." It coughed thick and wet. "But first, can I ask, why do you fight? You Yumis, what's your reason?" I almost didn't answer. Protocol demanded silence or immediate termination, but I was already so far beyond protocol that it hardly mattered. "We fight because we're ordered to," I said, "because our empire demands it." because we're told that beyond our borders lies only death and darkness and things that want to extinguish us. But do you believe that? The question struck me like a physical blow. I stared at this dying alien, this thing I had been trained to view as nothing more than an animate fungal growth, and I realized I didn't have an answer. I don't know, I whispered. The greenskin made a sound that might have been a laugh. We're the same, Den, both of us, just doing what we're told. What we're made for. Never thought about why. Never had the time, I guess. Too busy fighting. Its eyes dimmed. Seems like a waste. I terminated it quickly, a last bolt through the brain. Mercy, perhaps, or cowardice, I don't know which. The pattern became undeniable. I compiled 17 cases over 4 months, each one showing the same progression: extreme age, survival of countless battles, gradual loss of aggressive drive, emergent philosophical awareness, confusion about purpose. I cross-referenced with xenobiological studies and found something that had been buried in the data for decades. Greenskin biology operates on a feedback loop. Aggression triggers hormonal cascades that reinforce combat behavior, which triggers more aggression, perpetual and escalating. But the system requires novelty, new enemies, new challenges, new variations of violence. When a greenskin experiences too much sameness, when the fighting becomes routine rather than stimulating, the feedback loop begins to degrade. The hormones don't trigger as strongly. The biological programming starts to glitch. They get bored, and when a greenskin gets bored with fighting, it begins to die. Not physically, at least not immediately, but something in them breaks down, some essential drive that keeps the violence engine running. And in that breakdown, in that moment of biological malfunction, something else emerges: consciousness. Actual, reflective, horrified consciousness. I realized I was looking at evidence of something the Imperium had declared impossible, that the greenskins were not merely biological weapons, but beings capable of transcending their programming, that given enough time and enough monotony, they could evolve beyond their designed purpose. This information could change the entire strategic framework. If we understood this vulnerability, we could exploit it. We could find ways to accelerate the process, to bore them into submission rather than fight them to exhaustion. We could save billions of lives, human and otherwise. I wrote the report, complete, comprehensive, 43 pages of data, analysis and recommendations. I included the recordings, all of them, even the ones from my personal cylinder. I marked it priority urgentia and submitted it through every channel I had access to. The response came 3 weeks later. Inquisitor Valen arrived without warning, as they always do. I was summoned to a sealed chamber deep in the hive's administrative sector, a room I hadn't known existed. The Inquisitor was a thin figure in black, their face hidden behind a mask of bronze and ceramic, their voice modulated through vox grills that stripped away any trace of humanity. "You have compromised operational security," the Inquisitor said. "You have submitted materials containing classified xenological data to 17 different departmental divisions. You have drawn attention to strategic vulnerabilities that are, by necessity, compartmentalized." "I found evidence," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Evidence that could change how we fight the greenskin threat. They're not unstoppable. They have a weakness, psychological, biological. If we know." The words hit me like a lasgun blast. "You know?" "Of course we know." The Inquisitor moved to a wall-mounted data slate and entered a cipher key. The screen illuminated with documents, reports, studies, memoranda. All of them decades old, some centuries. The pattern you discovered was first documented 843 years ago by lexical Magos Drun. It has been observed and catalogued by 46 separate xenological divisions. It is, analyst, common knowledge among those with appropriate clearance. I couldn't speak. My mind reeled. trying to process what I was hearing. Then why? I managed. Why haven't we exploited it? Why are we still fighting them the same way we always have? The Inquisitor tilted their head, the gesture somehow conveying pity. Because we require them to fight the same way they always have. The greenskin threat is calibrated, analyst. Dangerous enough to justify military expansion and resource allocation, but not so dangerous as to genuinely threaten core imperial assets. They are the perfect enemy, eternal, brutal, and ultimately manageable. If we were to accelerate their psychological degradation, if we were to bore them into submission, as you put it, we would eliminate one of the Imperium's most valuable strategic assets. Valuable. I couldn't finish the sentence. War justifies infrastructure. Fear enables compliance. The greenskins serve a vital function in maintaining imperial cohesion. They give the population something to unite against, something to fear more than their own government. They provide testing grounds for new weapons, training opportunities for fresh troops, and a perpetual source of enemy action that prevents military downsizing. The Inquisitor clasped their hands behind their back. Analyst, you are not stupid. Surely you suspected this. I had. Somewhere deep down in the part of my mind I didn't like to examine, I had known. But knowing and having it stated so plainly are different things. What happens to me? I asked. You have demonstrated capability and initiative. You are therefore valuable. You will be reassigned to a specialized division within the Departamento Xenologos, subsection Threat Sustainability. Your new role will be to monitor greenskin populations and ensure that too many of them do not survive long enough to reach philosophical awareness. You will identify aged specimens and coordinate their termination before they can influence younger generations. You will help maintain the war at optimal intensity. And if I refuse? The Inquisitor was silent for a long moment. Then you misunderstand. You have already accepted. The alternative was never an option. That was 6 weeks ago. I now work in subsection Threat Sustainability, a division that officially does not exist. My job is to kill the ones who think, the ones who question, the ones who, like that first greenskin in the ruins of Processing Shaft 9 Tertius, have lived long enough to see through their programming. I am efficient. I am thorough. I have personally terminated 9 specimens in the last month alone. Each one died confused, asking questions I am not permitted to answer. Each one went to their death wondering why the violence never stops, never ends, never means anything. I understand now that I am not so different from them. I fight because I am made to fight. I kill because my biology, social, economic, hierarchical, demands it. I go through the motions of my duty with the same mechanical precision that I once heard in a dying greenskin's voice. And sometimes, late at night, when I listen to the recordings I am not supposed to keep but cannot bring myself to destroy, I wonder what would happen if I stopped. If I just didn't. If I refused to pull the trigger one more time, if I walked away from my post and let the old ones live, I know what would happen. I would be terminated, replaced. The machine would continue without me. Another analyst would take my place, would listen to the same questions, would file the same reports, would maintain the same terrible equilibrium. I am very good at my job. I have been commended twice since my reassignment. My supervisor tells me I have a bright future in threat management. I think about that first greenskin often, the one who asked why, the one who died without ever getting an answer. I think about what it said, about being tired, about the endless repetition, about wanting to stop but not knowing how. I think about it because I understand it now, because I am tired too, because I also don't know how to stop, because we are both trapped in the same grinding machine, doing what we were made to do, what we are compelled to do, over and over until we die, or until we somehow live long enough to see the horror of it. But there is one difference between us, I suppose. The greenskin at least had the mercy of physical death. I suspect my service will last much longer. I am young, I am healthy, I am efficient. I could do this for decades. I could become an expert, a specialist, a master of killing the ones who think too much. I could live long enough to become just like them, old and tired and full of questions I am not permitted to ask. Sometimes I find myself hoping for a stray shell, a miscalculated artillery strike, a greenskin raid that penetrates just a little too deep into the hive. Anything that would end this before I have to face the moment when I, too, am sitting in the ruins dying slowly, asking someone why we always keep fighting. But I know better. I know I will survive. I know I will continue. I know that years from now, perhaps decades, I will still be pulling the trigger on greenskins who have lived too long and learned too much. I will still be maintaining the machine. I will still be serving the function I was designed to serve. And maybe, if I live long enough, if I survive countless battles and endless repetitions and decades of mechanical duty, maybe I too will reach that moment of terrible clarity. Maybe I will understand finally and completely what that first greenskin tried to tell me in its dying breaths. Maybe I will realize that we were always the same, that there was never any difference between the weapon and the wielder, that we are all just biology and programming and genetic compulsion, dressed up in different skins, speaking different languages, but fundamentally and horrifically identical. Maybe I will realize that the war isn't between humans and greenskins at all, that it's between consciousness and compulsion, between the part of us that thinks and the part of us that simply acts, between the nightmare of awareness and the mercy of oblivion. But I suspect that when that moment comes, if it comes, there will be no one there to listen. There will be no young analyst with a recorder, no one to hear my questions or catalogue my confusion. There will only be the trigger and the shell and the silence after. I am very good at my job. I think I always will be. That is the horror of it in the end. Not that we fight without purpose, but that we cannot stop even when we understand the purposelessness. Not that we are programmed for violence, but that we remain conscious enough to witness our own programming at work, to feel every contradiction, to know the truth and be powerless to act on it. The greenskin died asking why we fight. I live asking the same question. Neither of us will ever receive an answer. The machine continues, the war continues, we continue, until we don't.